games anyway, so people can like heal themselves through reading, you know?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming.
They work.
They do work. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We are missing one panelist at the moment, but if they do join us, that'll be great. Otherwise, we can just soldier on. So you are here right now for Unstoppable Forces. Thank you for being here in San Diego and at the Public Library. So my name is Matthew No. I'm going to be your moderator. I'm a librarian, and I'm just going to leave it at that so we can talk to the people you came here to see. So before we get going, just a little introductions. So going down the line here, we have Rena Aoyang. Rena was born in Pittsburgh and has always been inspired by the Sunday newspaper funnies and slice of life tales. Her short stories have been nominated for the Ignatz and Eisner Awards, and she has been honored with a MoCA Arts Festival Awards of Excellence Silver Medal. Awards was in there multiple times in my head. She is also the publisher of the microcomics imprint Yam Books. Her first book was Winter Wonderland, and she has published 2 books with Drawn and Quarterly, Blameless on the Boogie and The Man in the Macintosh Suit. She lives in Oakland, California with her husband and son. Welcome, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Then we have Kate Glasheen. Kate was born and raised in Troy, New York, and lived there until their departure for the Pratt Institute for a BFA in Fine Art. Kate has since been a creator, artist, and contributor for several critically acclaimed books, participated in exhibitions and collections across the globe, and worked on several of the biggest properties in entertainment. Their artistic interests find communion in fine and sequential art under the notion that there's something hilarious about something that's not funny at all. Constellations is their author-artist debut. Kate lives, draws, and tattoos out of Philadelphia under the stringent supervision of Kipper the cat. Thanks for being here. Kipper's not here like over your shoulder right now, right?
I've got him on speakerphone and he is listening.
Okay.
Let me assure you.
Then we have Matt Tavares, and I may have spelled.
It's fine.
Good, okay. He's the author, illustrator of the New York Times best-selling picture book Dasher, as well as Red and Lulu, and several sports biographies, including Becoming Babe Ruth and Growing Up Pedro. He is also the author of 21 Steps, Guarding the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier by Jeff Gottsfield, The Gingerbread Pirates by Kristen Kladstrup, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, and Over the River and Through the Wood, among many other picture books. Matt lives in Maine. Welcome, thanks for being here. And Jasmine. We're glad you could make it. Jasmine Walls is a California-based writer, artist, and hot chocolate connoisseur with a passion for stories that are fun, engaging, and critical. Her works are unapologetically queer, inclusive, and span across several genres. She is the author of the D&D-inspired graphic novel The Last Session. Her upcoming graphic novel, Brooms, tells the story of an alternate U.S. magical history of the South with broom racing. Thank you for making it and being here.
Thank you.
Did you bring any hot chocolate with you?
I wish I did. I had one earlier, though. So if y'all want a good hot chocolate, nibble down in like a little Italy. Excellent.
Thanks for the tip. All right, so just before we get into any real tough questions, right? Can you tell everyone a quick overview of the books you're here with right now? Let's start here and move our way down.
Sure thing. My most recent book, Brooms, comes out October 10th. It's a queer, witchy 1930s Mississippi where 6 young women of color who the law actively oppresses and says they shouldn't have magic, decide to go around this by entering illegal broom races. So it's more of a sports, like an underdog sports story kind of vibe. It's one thing I wanted to do was not make a story that's about the struggle. It's definitely about finding your community and finding joy despite the hardships in life. And yeah, I'm really excited for it.
All right, hi. My book is Hoops, similar title, Brooms, Hoops. It's a story about a girls' high school basketball team. It's set in the 1970s. It's inspired by a true story, but it's fiction. And it's inspired by the team that was the first team to win the state championship in Indiana. The first team they had, the first year that they had a state tournament for girls. Like the movie Hoosiers is based on the boys tournament that they'd been doing for decades. And this was back when Title IX was passed in 1972. So a lot of schools now had girls' sports teams, but they didn't have the resources that the boys had. So this was a team where they had to make their own uniforms with white t-shirts and black tape, and they had to find their own ways to games, and they had to practice in the elementary school and didn't have equal access to their own gym. So it's sort of about what this team did to kind of prove that they belonged and that they deserved everything the boys had.
Hi, everyone. My book is Constellations, and this book is the story of a trans teen growing up in the 80s in upstate New York. And it's in kind of a post-industrial, depressed city, and the friction their existence kind of causes within their environment and the people around them causes them to self-medicate with alcohol. And that kind of, the stakes with that escalate until they end up in a court-ordered rehab. And the book kind of like just really dives into the interrelationship between substance abuse and queerness, and this time in queer history where there wasn't any nuance to it, and there weren't even kind of the words to describe and define what you were or figure out what you were. So it's the story of Claire kind of figuring that out as much as they can and hopefully coming out the other side. So yeah, thank you.
That's great. Hi, my name's Rena Yu Yang. This is my book that just came out this spring, The Man in the Macintosh Suit. It follows the adventures of a Filipino immigrant who came to America, he had a law degree, and finds himself as a migrant worker in Watsonville in Central California. And he finds through a letter that his estranged wife has all of a sudden found like herself in San Francisco. So he goes to San Francisco to figure out what she's doing there, because she's supposed to be in the Philippines still. So, so what's up with that? So, so he's going to San Francisco and has the adventures in San Francisco's Manila Town, which is a Filipino community in the 1920s. So it follows his adventures and the community there in San Francisco, and it's kind of an homage to film noir with Filipino leads. So, yeah.
Thank you all. So I've read all of these, and they're all great, and you should go buy them later. But for now, I'm curious why these stories? Why did you want to do this one right now? And we'll move our way the other direction this time.
Yeah, well, I always loved detective stories. I mean, comics I read in the Sunday Funnies, like Dick Tracy, like I love Raymond Chandler novels. I liked like all the like detective serials, and so I always wanted to do a detective comic. And I was thinking about it like 10 years ago, and I really wasn't in the mindset to make this comic because I was always into autobio comics and memoir comics. And then I think it was because, and I hate when it's because the pandemic came. You know, like it's a sad time. It's not like all these artists though found. I think it was their time to like really find what they were really trying to figure out things in life. Like what are the things that they really want to do with their with their life. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about was just. My second book is like an homage to the American musical, and so this one's an homage to like my love of film noir, and the romance of film noir. And when I was thinking about doing it, I was thinking like, oh, I could just totally make this into a bubble like universe, like all film noir is like. But then I realized when thinking more about the characters and thinking more about where they were and what time period, that it was important to talk about the history that affected all their like actions and their decisions in that time period. For me was around like 1929, when there's a lot of anti-Asian, anti-Filipino and immigrant sentiment going on. And I was thinking, especially during the pandemic, a lot of anti-Asian hate was on the rise. And so that was not lost on me, that this is something that is a part of American history, isn't really talked about a lot, or at all.
Yeah.
And especially Filipinos' part in making America what it is. So I was really excited about bringing their stories to the forefront.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Kate?
So, I think you asked what made us want to make these stories.
No, yeah.
Sorry, no, this is to clarify that I would say I didn't want to make this story at all. My own story, not making fun of you. But it just kind of felt like at the time a few things in my life were converging where I had a lot of a lot of damages I hadn't dealt with, and part of that is that Claire, the main character in this story, is kind of an avatar for me. Like it's a fictional work, and it's Claire's story, but it's our shared experience. Like a lot of the stuff in the book was pulled from my life, or served as inspiration for it. So it's not exact, and the chronology of it is my entire life condensed into Claire's, like a couple years of Claire's life. So, I grew up trans in Troy, New York in the 80s, and I had ignored it. I had lived as myself without really understanding what that was for as long as I possibly could without having to start to deal with it. And I had also gone to rehab myself once as a teen and once as an adult, and I had been self-medicating a lot of that stuff. And I think that I shifted, I got healthier in certain ways, but I kind of just shifted all that onto my career and kind of became even more of a workaholic. But comics are tough, and I definitely was kind of scrapping to make a way for myself. And as I was getting older, it was feeling harder to keep going at that rate. And it's as you're approaching middle age, it's it's different to be poor when I'm 39 versus 20. So all those things kind of converged, and I was I need to maybe get out of comics because this is killing me. And but this will be my last hurrah in comics to make this book. And I kind of had to trick myself. The only way I could really zero in and work on this stuff is if I tricked myself into making it a work deadline. So that's what I did. And yeah, the end.
All right. I first got the idea, or I first found out about the story that inspired this book. Back in 2016, I read a book called We Were There Too, Young People in U.S. History by Philip Hose. It's a really amazing book. Tells the whole history of the United States through stories of kids and teenagers who did something important. And I came to this chapter about this girls' high school basketball team, and I just felt like it needed to be its own book. These girls did some amazing stuff on the basketball court, but they also made a huge difference in their community, and they changed the way a lot of people thought about girls' sports at the time. Now, I was coming from a place where I had done a bunch of picture books, and I had done some nonfiction biographies of baseball players, talk about overcoming obstacles. They all sort of had a theme where it was about them as kids growing up. In all those stories, the person ended up being a professional athlete, which I started feeling a little bit like I wasn't sure how I felt about that always being the point of the book. And I loved this story because it was about regular kids. They weren't famous athletes. They were just regular high school kids who made a big difference and really had a huge impact. So that's really what made me want to tell this story.
Yeah. Jasmine?
Well, for Brooms, there were kind of three things that made me want to write the story. One, I wanted a fun, fantasy, fantastical, magical story set in American history. I was just real tired of European wizards and witches. They're always in England.
Yeah.
And I'm I want to see people like me in a setting like mine that's not a big city like New York or something. So I was I'm going to make a fun, witchy story set in the South. The second point was I wanted to write about people on the margins. I wanted to write about people who didn't get invited to elite academies. Like dark academia is really big, you know, wizard schools are really big. I was like, what about the people who don't get magical little invite letters? What about the people who are actively told you cannot have magic? Because even if you're writing a world where people have magic, it wouldn't change a lot of the historical points that are hit in our world. And I wanted to reckon combining those two things, where people have magic, but what hasn't changed about the world? And how do those people deal with it? Yeah, I had a third point, but I've genuinely forgotten. But those are two of the biggest ones.
You wanted it to be fun, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was the third. Thank
Yeah.
you. The third point was I was really tired of historical stuff set with people of color in like 1950s, 1930s, where it's all about how horrible life was. Because if life was nothing but terribleness, we wouldn't be here. Like, if everything was just the bad things, there would be no reason to fight so hard. And I wanted to focus on the joys that people found in life despite those hardships, and why those things kind of gave them a hope and made them fight for a better future.
Yeah. So, Kate, I'm sorry, this is going to kind of switch off the question I sent you a little bit. But so thinking about setting, right?
Panel's over!
So we were talking about setting and joy in hard times and in bad times. And so all of these books are, to some degree or another, set in the past. We've got, you know, anywhere from the late 1800s, early 1900s to like 1980, right? So were you looking backwards on, did that just feel right? Like, why go backwards? And how do you balance that, some of that historical, things were kind of rough or bad. I have a note here not to curse, so I'm not going to curse. But so things were rough, but then you wanted to find joy in it. So how do you balance those things out in a way that the story flows well, right? Like, so there's a hard thing there. Anyone who wants to jump in can jump in.
Well, I think like in life, like it's a reflection of life or mirror of life that like there is good and there's bad. And that is like part of making interesting characters and interesting story choices is how do people deal with adversity and also get through it, but also like, yeah, handle that. And a lot of it, especially in my book, is they handle it with humor and trying to find out like adventures or being in a fantasy world. And that's a huge part of the book is like the Macintosh suit is a symbol of like being glamorous, and they're like farm workers, but they dress up in these wonderful, amazing, you know, bespoke outfits and conjuring a life that they do not currently have. And so, and I think a lot of like it being set in a certain time frame, it's interesting to see similarities of things that are still happening in current America, especially. And so, yeah, that's like an interesting way to deal with conflict and storytelling. Is how that's a great question. Is how do you have your stories be interesting, and and your characters be interesting? But like, but yeah, it is really through humor and fantasy through this book, especially.
Yeah, I think this is kind of less specifically about my book and more just, I guess, like a broad observation. But I just think there's never not bad stuff happening, you know? And I think, I don't know, like, utopia would be only good stuff, and it's just, you know, the realistic version is our lives will have more difficulty than not, for the most part, in varying degrees. And I think that's like, it's important, super challenging, way easier said than done, but it's important and maybe just crucial to be able to find the beauty in how you survive these difficulties, because they will never not be there, you know?
Yeah.
Kipper did I do okay?
Yeah, I wanted to add too, I think it's always a tricky thing in writing for kids
Yeah.
when you are writing about a time period in history, or even stuff now, just what you're going to leave in, what you should leave out, what you want to tell the truth and be honest, but not everything is always going to fit in this story, and not everything maybe is something you want to work into the story. I feel like in Hoops, 1970s, the story definitely deals with sexism. It doesn't really get into race or other things that were happening at the time. But yeah, I feel like there's also a challenge of like making it, you want the story to connect to kids now. You don't want it to be so historical that like they're not connecting with the characters. Like there has to be kind of a give and take. I finished all the final art for Hoops, or I thought I finished. And I'd spent 6 months doing all the color, and then I got feedback that basically my publisher, they didn't like the color. And it was 1970s. I kind of had really a lot of fun doing the 1970s. It was all like orange and brown and olive green, and they were like, it needs like brighter colors. It needs a little more modern color palette. And so I went back and did all the color over again. And that was sort of one of those things where like, yeah, the 70s are cool, but we kind of want it to feel a little bit more modern just for the kids that are going to be reading it.
And so maybe the historical accuracy was less
little too
vital
much.
to, yeah.
I got carried away with it.
Yeah.
For Brooms, it was very much a mixture of wanting to prove that the people who lived in what we consider like a historical setting
Yeah.
were just like us. Just because we see them in photos that are black and white and sepia, we have this, and a lot of, when it comes to like posed portraits, there's this illusion that things were just people were serious and somber back then. And I'm like, nah, they were just as goofy as we are. And I wanted to show that in the book, that these are people who are just teenagers. They're living their lives, they're doing their best. And also, like, I really wanted the clothing from the 30s. Like, I'm a very visual person. I was like, I want a Newsy Boys hat. I want some overalls. Yeah, so part of it was aesthetics, but a lot of it was wanting to build that connection. Be like, the people who were, who are now great grandparents, were just like us.
Yeah.
Just with, things were a little bit different, but more than not, they were like us.
I almost want to have like a side panel to discuss fashion in y'all's comics, because there's so much there. But that's not this panel. Yeah. So all of your books today, we're looking at the past. We're also looking at challenges that people have to deal with, and in settings that maybe they didn't have a voice so strongly to tell their own stories in. So what was the research process like, and how did you ensure your characters in these books got to have their own voices? Because in some of your books, there's like half a dozen people to keep up with, and they're all powerful, and they all get to speak for themselves in a way that you don't always see. So can you talk about how you handled all of that? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll start. Go back this way. Yeah, so the way that I went around them having a strong voice in the society that they're in is to completely ignore mainstream society. Everything that takes place on the fringes. A lot of the book is set in these back alley broom races. A lot of it's set in these small cabins where these characters live. They are not welcome in mainstream life. They're not welcome in the center of town. Jim Crow laws were happening. So it's not set there because that's not their story. I didn't want to tell a story about white people being intruded on by brown people. I wanted to tell the brown people's story and have it be set in the places they're going to be spending most of their time in their lives. And that's with each other. A lot of it is based on small queer communities in the South at the time where they're kind of secret, but they all know each other. And the time they're going to spend together is not out in public necessarily. It's with each other in these small communities where they can be themselves. So that's why I gave them their voices, was I gave them their communities where they can speak freely with each other, and then there are glimpses of them going into town and being stared at by the police, that sort of thing, where you see what life would be like, you know, when they try to go into like town or things like that. But for the most part, the book is set in places where they can be themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, my research process was sort of this roundabout, crazy thing where it started out, I originally signed a contract to do this book as a nonfiction picture book about the actual team that this book is inspired by. So I got in touch with a few of the players, and they were all, and I'd never had this happen before because my other sports books are about professional athletes, a couple of whom were still alive but didn't really care that I was making a book about them, where these women were thrilled to share their stories, and I had these great conversations with Judy and Lisa and Cindy. But then the deeper I got into it, the more I felt like, oh my goodness, there's so much I want to put in this book. It's not going to fit in a picture book, and I feel like it's for older kids, and my kids were really into reading graphic novels, and I had been reading a lot and felt like this should be a graphic novel, so it was this whole other process. But in the end, I really based the three main characters on the three players I had spoken with. And because I talked with them, I sort of had a sense of who they were and what their take was on everything that happened. But then I got to sort of create my own characters. But mostly I ended up doing it as fiction because I wanted them all to be able to talk. I didn't want to make up a bunch of stuff that they never really said.
Yeah.
So I ended up thinking, well, if it's fiction inspired by a true story, they could joke around with each other. They could have distinct personalities. They could have real conversations and develop friendships. So that's sort of how I came at it.
I would say my main tool for research was flashbacks, but no, I think childhood for me was hard in a lot of ways that I couldn't really understand, but I also loved my childhood and had an awesome time in ways, and it's super sacred to me. And I know that part of that is carving these like pockets for like my friends and I to just do our thing and not have to explain ourselves. And I think in Constellations, pre-rehab, that's kind of what I tried to draw from for Claire and their friends at that point. And then rehab becomes kind of this grand pocket. It's like a bubble where these kids can kind of like hit pause on outside life and all the things that can interfere with just focusing on what their problem is, like what substance gives them this problem, why are they using this substance, like what is the problem at the bottom of all of that. And I think, you know, in my times in rehab, the interpersonal stuff was just so intense. Like people, because of like the intensity of the material talked about and just like the stakes being so high and just like this forced, like just really accelerated intimacy with people who like are strangers to you, like 30 minutes later, they're hearing like terrible things about you that a lot of people you really care about don't know. And it just creates these like super intense bonds, but they're also super brittle because people are so close to the edge at any given point of like slipping out of a better trajectory. And I think, you know, I remember almost every person I was in those rooms with, and because those relationships were so intense and everybody was so distinct, and it was almost like in a kind of like warped, kind of beautiful way. It was almost like this, it's like any drama you could watch on TV, but you know, of course, like more terrible. And so yeah, so I think those are the two main things that I just would try to kind of dig into and go back to and draw from that to try and give these characters, try and make them authentic, try and make them believable, and try and do an okay job in respect to the kids and the adults I was in those rooms with.
Yeah.
For me, there were like different levels or layers of research I did. I knew about Filipino history through like ethnic studies program I learned in college. Went to San Francisco State and has won like the first ethnic studies college, and so I was able to take classes about like Asian Americans and Asians and Americans and the history of America and Filipino American history through that. But that was like, you know, like 20 years. I don't know. I'm not going to date myself. But it was far away. So like there was also just like, I have like so much gratitude for like libraries and historians and ethnic studies professors that took time to document all this history. That is, a lot of it is like spoken word, like oral, like history, oral history, and that they took the time to like collect like photos or even stories about migrant workers in the 20s. And so in that level, like I learned about, in a general sense, the community in those communities and those migrant farmers in rural California, but also in a more personal level, like my great-grandfather and my grandfather were immigrated in that same time period. So I had like a personal and also like a whole community level, like kind of research. And so I was able to like interview my mom and my aunt, and they talked about their dads and their uncles. And I found this like this photo album of just these like dapper gents from the 20s that I didn't even know who they were, but they were these just normal guys, like we were talking about, just normal guys like having dinner and having parties and just like just having selfies, really. And they were like in their suits, like, look at us. And it's like, again, it's like this is like stuff like this is how we are now.
Yeah.
And so that was the connecting thread. And then I think also finding those characters is a lot of it's based on, so basically like my grandfather or, you know, my uncles and aunties. A lot of the characters in this book are kind of homages to them. So that's where I found their voice through relatives like that. So it was like academic and also very academic and educational and collegiate, but also very personal and just like, you know, aunts talking in like a living room, you know, it's those little things.
I realized I forgot to tell you literally anything about the research.
Oh, no. I
did
have a question
Yeah.
for you about that.
Oh, you want me to hold it off?
Yeah,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, I'll hold it off. I don't mind.
I couldn't resist coming up with a question specifically for each of you, so I want to try to run through those before we run out of time. Sure. But since you brought that up, about research, one of the things that really stood out to me in your book was there's sign language in the book, but it's specifically not ASL, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of research, I was curious what the process for researching that was like and getting that language representation in there. And then you can answer the other research part as part of that.
Yeah, I did a ton of research for Brooms, and I genuinely enjoy the research process. You find so many fun little facts that really kind of can add to a story. I researched the time period, the location. Some of the characters are Choctaw, the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians specifically. And so I did a ton of research to try and be as accurate and respectful as I can to them. But also, one of those characters uses sign language. She's deaf. But because she didn't go to an English school, I was like, there's no reason she would know ASL, because you had to go to like the specific Southern American Sign Language school to learn ASL at the time, and it would have been really difficult. And at this time is also when they were, you know, pretty much stealing children to put into government schools, and that is talked about in the book as well. And so their family actively says, we are not allowing you to be put in these schools. So I was like, well, what sort of ASL would she be using? And there are plenty of native-specific sign languages. A lot of them are not documented. And it is one thing I recognize in the book is that even if they were, maybe they're not for me to know. And I want to respect that. But there is a book that was published in the, I believe, the late 1800s. And it's called American Sign Language. It is primarily from indigenous people from the plains, central US. But it is the only one that is so widely documented where you have a whole selection of sign language that you can use. It has illustrations to help you actually know what the signs look like. It has descriptions. And so I used that as a reference, and then we later on actually had the honor of contacting the Mississippi Band of Choctaw, who then went over it with us so that we could be like, hey, if we messed up, let me know, we'll rewrite it. And they approved it. They said, this will work, because for Choctaw, they don't have written records of sign language, so they do have sign language. There wasn't anything we could reference for the book. So they just went over it and made sure that we weren't doing anything we shouldn't be doing, which I appreciate. So that was actually really cool. And along with that, we have actual Chata, which is the Choctaw language. And the language experts over there also went over that and made sure it was historically accurate, that the accents were accurate, and we have that in there, along with some Cantonese as well for one of the characters. So that was a lot of fun to do, and I'm really grateful that we got to work with these language experts. But outside of that, I use the library a ton. So I use the library for to find references, to find, again, fashion references, vehicle references. We actually pulled several of the character names from censuses of the time. So they're actually, I was like, I don't want to come up with a name that wouldn't have been used at that time. So we use censuses to pull up names, and yeah, I had a whole big folder, all the research I did, and I was like, all right, artists, you dive in. Here's buildings and vehicles, here's clothing. So I had like all these subsections. So yeah, the research was a lot of fun to do.
Great.
The library has amazing
Yeah.
photo,
Oh,
a photo library. Like it's amazing, like just like trying to find like the setting in San Francisco, like to make sure that like buildings were there or not there. I remember like I put Coit Tower and they're like, that wasn't there in the 20s, and you're like, erase that immediately. but it's like, yeah, it's just amazing how much like libraries are just, it's just a wealth of information. So I really have huge gratitude for them.
Well, Rena, I'll ask you your question now.
Oh, is it about the Coit Tower?
We touched on it a little bit already, right? So, but noir seems to be having a big moment in comics right now.
Yeah.
Like a revival, kind of.
Well, it's funny because like I was thinking about this and I'm like, I want to do a detective comic, and they're like, nobody wants detective comic. It was wild, and I was like, what? And it was like during the time like they had Perry Mason again on on HBO. I'm like, you're wrong. So, but that it wasn't like that. But yeah, it's interesting because right when I was making this, also like The Good Asian, that graphic novel, that comic series by Porsak Pisha, he was doing that around the same time, and we actually were able to do a conversation together in LA, and we were like, we have a lot to talk about because we were doing these at the same time, and we were kind of doing our own stuff, and I had heard about it, and I'm like, I'm not going to read.
Your research process sounds familiar too, because I've talked to him about this as well. Yeah.
He researches hard. Like he had, it was very much a lot of research for him. And mine was like I did research, but I also wanted to like have room for play and freedom to like interpretation, especially because at that time period there isn't a lot of people that are still around to talk about it.
But so was noir the original goal here, or was it about telling or was it about this community in particular, right? So there's almost, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, maybe noir is the perfect genre for this kind of community development story, because there's a range of trust levels with everyone, and a lot of mystery going on. But everyone's still having fun.
Yeah, I think originally when I was doing it, I was just like, I'm just gonna do like my version of, I don't know, The Big Sleep with Filipino characters, and the whole the plot doesn't have to make sense, because that's the fun part of noir. It's like this happens and we don't even know why, but let's just like end it, and it's amazing, and like and then I realized like I could do that. Like, that's the fun, quirky part of film noir. It's like so like corny and sappy. That's the part I love. Yeah. And but then again, like I was talking about, like when I was thinking about the time period, like it's like it had to be an important part of the what they were going through at that time, has to play a central role in how they make certain decisions, and how they trust other people, and how and there is that they form a community from that, so so that came afterwards, the whole world building, I guess, because I was thinking I'm just gonna put in this bubble world where like you don't even know really like where they are. type. But that was the first feeling about it.
Okay.
But then I also was thinking about San Francisco and Manila Town. It was just
Yeah.
it just made sense. So it just came together, and I think that was real cool how it just came together magically like that.
Yeah. So Matt,
Yes.
you mentioned this was originally going to be a picture book.
Mm-hmm.
You've also mentioned sports movies already, right? And so as I was reading this, I legitimately kind of felt like I was reading the best way I could think of it, I'm reading a sports movie right now, and it
Yeah.
has all those highs and lows and all of that energy, right? That's what you were going for, I think.
Yeah.
And so, how did you did you lay everything out in thumbnails to try to get that pacing all right, or did it just come, or?
So yeah, I actually, I had never made a graphic novel before. So my first step was just like talking to friends who've done this before and picking their brains. And in general, it seems like writing a script was a part of the early part of the process that most people did. So I read books about script writing. I read a book called The Secrets of Story by Matt Bird, who writes for film and television. Save the Cat was a good one. These are people who write for, it's mostly about writing movie scripts.
Yeah.
So I kind of treated it like that.
Okay.
And I had never written a story that had so many different things happening in it. So I also started using a program called Scrivener, which really made, I don't know if anyone else uses Scrivener. It was like amazing because it basically you can make all these digital Post-it notes where I kind of just would write out just what's going to happen and just kind of map it all out and then dig into each one as much as I could.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really did think of it as, I just pictured it as a movie as I was writing it,
Yeah.
and then I would watch Hoosiers just for to get that feeling and get back into my writing. But yeah, I'm glad that you found
absolutely
that.
captured that. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
So my 2-second quick question is the older woman who's like knitting while the games are going on, is she based on a real character, a real person?
No.
Okay. But like I loved watching her progression throughout the book. You just have to read the book, but.
Yeah, that was the fun part. Once I turned it into fiction, I was free to just add characters.
Yeah.
Like when I interviewed Judy Warren, I really hoped that she had like a childhood friend. Like her expected path was to be a cheerleader because that's what girls did when she was a kid. There was no girls basketball available. So I was like, so did you have like a childhood friend that maybe was going to be a cheerleader with you? And then you like how did those friendships develop as you became, once there was a team and you became a basketball player? And she's like, no, there really wasn't anything like that. And I was like, ah. But then I was like, all right, I can just make up that character because that really helps the story. So that's where Stacy came from.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the kind of tension that is completely relatable, whether it's the 70s or 2023.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, all
every
kids have
every
that.
kid group is
Yep.
going to have that. But so, Kate, my question is perhaps less cheery for you. I'm sorry.
Lay it on me.
You actually saw me post this on Instagram already, kind of. Yeah. So there's an interaction in the book between Claire and Charlie, and it goes something like, pain is a virus. It needs to multiply. To make more of itself, pain only wants more pain. It tricks us into thinking the only way to get rid of it is to pass it on to someone else. And so that really resonated with me personally. But so this moment could have been incredibly preachy, right? And me saying it just now probably was. But the way you drew those kind of moments in the book, right? It had this, it's clearly someone trying to help someone, and it's giving experience that someone may not be ready for. But never once did I actually feel like I was being talked down to or preached at.
Glad to
And
hear
that's
it.
hard, right? So what was the process of getting those moments like that? Like did you have to redraw those bunch, the perspectives, and how did all that work?
So I think there's a few things. Like, first of all, just drawing the human form. One hilarious part of my process is that if I'm drawing someone's expression, I can't stop myself from making the expression while I'm drawing it. Like, I think there's some connection with, like, my hand understands which muscles are moving here to draw here or something. But anyways, it terrifies baristas. So try to stop yourself from doing that if you work out in public. But so I think also, but on the anatomical clip, I have like hundreds and hundreds of hours of figure drawing. I have hundreds and hundreds of hours of portrait drawing as my training. And I took this one class. It was so wild. It was like it was an elective for anatomy and figure drawing, and my class at Pratt would take the train to Columbia Medical Institute every Saturday morning, where we had our own designated corpse, and it was like filleted. Wow. So they would like. Is this okay that I'm talking about?
Yes, no. It's educational.
That's just my cinema.
That's right.
It's fine.
So they would peel the skin back, and we would draw.
He's just
Thumbs up from
Thank
Jim.
you. And we got a green light, folks. Let's do this. So they would peel the skin back to focus on the literal muscles. So we would like draw the forms that make the flesh and just get such a, like you can draw from books, but like to see the shapes, the contours, all that, and like how this muscle wraps around here and connects here, like, it's always different seeing it in person, doing it in person. So just from a technical standpoint, I think facial expressions, definitely the veneer over the style that I draw in probably isn't for everyone, but the anatomy underneath it is solid. So I think that can help a lot with as far as conversations between characters, lending some weight to it. Just kind of like adding to the believability of the moment. And then the second piece of this, I think, is just, with the balance on a comic page between visuals and words, it can be a battle for real estate, and that balance can be hard to hit. But the thing that I try to avoid more than any other thing when I draw comics, if there's like a dialogue heavy scene, is to just have like a page of repeating talking heads. And to avoid that, like I'll try, if I catch myself feeling like my art's leaning in that direction, I'll really think about, like, I'll try and picture myself in the scene. I'll try and picture what the room would look like, what it would feel like, what the characters would be looking at if they were in a conversation, like that. I think that's the scene where they're, while Charlie's talking to Claire, that'd be really funny if I'm mixing up my own book, which may be happening right now. But, while they're talking, it's to the backdrop of like just certain objects around the therapy office. And, I think just thinking, it can be world building stuff to just think about the room folks are in, or just enrich the scene and make it more than just the words that are happening. So hopefully, I'm glad to hear you like that.
Yeah.
That's always nice. I'm glad you didn't say you hated it, because that's always not nice.
That's not so nice. I would not have said that in this room, I promise you.
Oh, and can I add one quick thing? Do we
Sure.
have time? I did remember, totally unrelated to this question, but the research question. So this Constellation takes place in Troy, New York, and my family has lived there for generations. I totally forgot to mention, part of my research was going through all my family's photo albums, which is like adds that personal history and that public history of how the city was and how, when they were young, when I was young, so all that, yeah.
Thank you. It is the scene where there's different focuses on objects in the room.
Yes.
I found it to make sure for you. Unfortunately, my timer says we're under a minute, and I was going to ask a bunch of stuff that I didn't get to, because that's always the case. And the people in the room, we're going to do some signing afterwards, if I remember correctly, if I'm told correctly. So if you have questions, I encourage you to ask the creators then. But before we run out of time, can you all tell people how to find you, either online or while here at Sandy? We've got a couple more days, right? So where can people find you?
You can mostly find me online, Twitter under MythJ Comics. You can find me on Instagram under MythJ, MythJae. My name is super common, so I can never use it for social media, so I had to come up with a new one. But the easiest way, and the one that I update the most, is actually my website. It's just jasminewalls.com. You will find all of my books, where to buy them, any upcoming events. All that's going to be on there, because I'm really bad at social media.
Yeah, my website's tavaresbooks.com, and I'm at Tavares Books on most of the social media sites.
Social media for me, I am also bad at it, but it's probably also what I'm best at promotional-wise, so that's a bad balance, but that's what we're working with. So yeah, so Instagram can link to my comic stuff, fine art stuff, and all those kinds of goings-ons. That's Katie Crime Spree, all one word. And then I'm also just coming out the other side of my tattoo apprenticeship, and if you care about tattoos, then you can check me out also on Instagram, Katie_Glash_tattoos. Almost forgot that last part. And then I'm leaving tomorrow morning, unfortunately, but you know, if you see me here tonight at any point, feel free to grab me and throw things at me, or not. Don't do that.
Don't commit a crime spree against the crime spree, okay?
Leave that to the professionals.
Yeah. What about you, Rena?
So I'll be here tomorrow signing, well, not here, like the convention center, signing at Mysterious Galaxy at 11:19, and it's at 1 p.m. And I'll only be there for 30 minutes, and then I'll be roaming around trying to be on lines to get exclusive as Comic-Con stuff everywhere else. But no. And then online, I'm on Instagram. It's Rena Yay, Rinayay. I want to make it more confusing around my last name. So it's Rena Yay. And my website, renayuyang.com.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here and talking with us.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. And thank you all for coming out and supporting our creators and
Thanks,
Comic-Con.
guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, library.
Do we stay here inside? Oh.